What's up, YouTube fragrance family and friends? I'm Tommy with Studio Sense. Welcome to another day talking about men's fragrance. Today I'm going to do something for the first time on my channel. I'm going to go over 10 fragrances that I personally feel are a perfect, flawless victory, a perfect fragrance, a 10 out of 10. So when we come back, we're going to take a look at 10 fragrances that I feel are perfect, are flawless. And this is going to be the summer edition. That and more, so stay tuned. Hey guys, and welcome back. I'm really glad that you're here today to check out today's video because I've got 10 fragrances that I personally feel rate a 10 out of 10 that are flawless, that are perfect, so well blended that I just can't get my nose out of them. And every time I wear these fragrances, I'm like, why can't they all be like this? But then again, we don't live in a perfect world, but I consider these fragrances perfect. Some of these are gonna be like obvious choices to you, and some of these may surprise you, but without further ado, let's go ahead and get right to it because we've got 10 to go over. My very first fragrance that I think is perfect is from the house of Christian Dior. Now, for those of you out there that don't like a realistic iris or orris note, you're probably not a fan of this fragrance, but I love the iris in this kind of lightly makeup-y, lipsticky kind of smell that is just so rich. To me, iris, violet, jasmine, geranium, those are some of the heavy hitters in the floral community that I really enjoy in modern men's fragrance, and they're doing such a good job, not only in the Givenchy Gentleman line, but also right here. The intensity is bumped up quite a bit. Along with iris, you also have Ecuadorian Brett seed and Virginia cedar in the base. Extremely rich, potent, sophisticated, upscale fragrance that can be worn on any occasion you see fit. Dior Homme Intense. Our next 10 out of 10 perfect fragrance came out in 2015. It's from the house of Giorgio Armani. Matilda Bijawi is the nose behind this fragrance. It's one of those fragrances that once you smell, you either immediately fall in love with or you're like, I'm not so sure about that. In other words, it's like one of those galvanizing fragrances. It's not necessarily one of the most virile masculine fragrances because it's a little bit floral on the cedar side. It's extremely woody, obviously being cedar water. You're not surprised to find out that it smells like cedar largely. It's got a floral side to it with some violet leaf. It's got some spicy cumin. It's got sage. In the base, you've got cedar, black tea, and suede. So it's got some light resins in there. It's just rough enough to hold to bind everything together. Such a smooth composition though. One of the best, smoothest cedar-based compositions on the men's fragrance market. I highly recommend trying out Giorgio Armani's Eau de Cedre. Now here's probably where I'm gonna lose some of you guys. I really dig this fragrance. It's brand new to the market, new to the scene. It's from the house of Dolce & Gabbana. Light blue forever just does it for me for summer. It's one of the most realistic grapefruit scents. You actually get a mix of that citrus juice from the actual pulp, the meat, the very center, the very epicenter of the fruit, and you get that lightly bitter, sharp rind oil in there as well. And it's all encompassed within this fragrance, but it also in the dry down reminds me very much of Terre d'Hermes Eau Fraiche, which is a really nice, lightly orangey fragrance. And that's what this feels like. It feels like a little bit of grapefruit peel and orange peel in the base. So it's a little bit softer, a little bit more resinous. That sharpness dies away in the dry down quite a bit, but it does live throughout the life of the fragrance. That nice, fresh, extremely realistic, hyper realistic grapefruit note lasts throughout the life of the fragrance, and that really is why it's in this list. It's a perfect note. Now, if you don't like grapefruit, understandably, you're not gonna like this fragrance, but to me, it's just a perfect representation of a summertime fresh fragrance done in grapefruit, and that's why it's my 10 out of 10. Next up is another fragrance from the house of Giorgio Armani. Profundo to me is like the penultimate Acqua di Gio in many ways. I feel like it represents the best of what the line can do in terms of an aquatic. It's got more of a refined upscale feel to it, yet it still maintains that nice casual linen shirt, khaki pants, driftwood, aquatic driftwood kind of feel to it. It's got so many more uses than any other Acqua di Gio, I feel. It's very, very versatile, and it's a blue fragrance too. So it broadens the spectrum in terms of the uses of this. Can be worn casually, can be worn worn in more refined or black tie events, upscale events. Acqua di Gio Profundo is an all-around head-turning, compliment-pulling fragrance that will get you attention every time for all the right reasons. And that's why it's a 10 out of 10 for me. Alright guys, admittedly I might be cheating here a little bit, but I don't mind if you don't, because you're going to see a couple of houses more than once. In this case, this is Christian Dior coming back at you. Dior Homme Eau for men is the perfect representation of the Dior Homme DNA and scent profile in a summertime fresh fragrance. So basically what Dior has done is they've taken that iris note in Dior Homme Intense, they've kind of bookended it with some citrus. You've got Calabrian bergamot, you've got Moroccan grapefruit, you've got some coriander in here, and of course sitting again on a base of Virginian cedar. So you've got that nice sharp woody cedar to rest on, but then you've got a little bit of fresh fruits mixing in with the iris note. That's what makes it a wonderfully fresh, excellent choice for spring and summer. So it kind of scratches that visceral fragrance itch when needed, where Dior Homme Intense doesn't. So it kind of picks up the slack a little bit with that opening that is super fresh and fruity. And that's one reason why Dior Homme Eau is a 10 for 10 for me. Another reason is it's been discontinued. Discontinued fragrances are like a siren call for me. Once I hear them, you're not going to be able to be had in the future. I want to have you now. And then you smell it and you're like, man, why did they discontinue such a fantastic fragrance? You'll ask yourself that many times over. If you stay on course on your fragrance journey, you'll run into that more than once. I guarantee you, and that's the case with the Dior Homme Eau. Next up, we're moving away from Giorgio Armani to the house of Prada. Prada Luna Rasa Carbon is not only to me the best of the Prada Luna Rasa line, it kind of represents Prada jumping into the ring with a hyper-versatile fragrance that is a departure from Dior Sauvage, but it is very similar to Dior Sauvage. So this is a softer man's Sauvage. It's a little bit more temperate, a little bit more moderate, and not quite as scratchy, I would say, the ambroxan, as it is in Dior Sauvage. And so that's why I prefer this much over Dior Sauvage. I think Dior Sauvage is really close to being a 10 out of 10. That's why this Prada Luna Rasa Carbon is a 10 out of 10 for me. I think it does what Dior Sauvage does better in this case. It's like a song that you like and then you hear a remix and you're like, man, that remix is so much better. This is kind of sort of the Dior Sauvage remix to me. It opens with a bright burst of bergamot and pepper, then it mixes with a nice soft but sharp lavender. You get some patchouli in here, and finally that ambroxan that carries it and gives it volume. Fantastic 101 use kind of fragrance. Another hyper versatile fragrance that can be worn year round. It's one of those all-weather fragrances. This is the penultimate Swiss Army knife fragrance. I feel Prada Luna Rasa Carbon is definitely worth owning and is a 10 out of 10 in my book. Our next fragrance is another example of a flanker outdoing the previous flankers. It's from the house of Yves Saint Laurent. I have put Yves Le Parfum through some brutal paces since I've owned it because I wanted to take some notes for an actual review. That's why I've had it for so long and not done an actual review of it, because I want to give you guys the best information about this, because I feel like it's one of the biggest 2021 releases in terms of anticipatory and also just coming from a fantastic line of fragrances, the Y line of YSL or Yves Saint Laurent. It is, to me, a perfect 10 out of 10. As I've said in my first impressions, at least I think I said this, I feel like Yves Le Parfum is the perfect soft place to land for the evolution of the Y DNA and the Y scent profile. It's just where it should have ended up, and they couldn't have done a better job in my estimation. It opens with that familiar burst of grapefruit, apple, ginger. You've got some aldehydic notes in there. Then you get into that gloriously meaty middle of sage, lavender, some geranium, resting on a base of cedarwood, tonka bean, patchouli, and some darker resinous incense that makes this the wonderful blue fragrance that it is. There are fragrances out there like Bleu de Chanel, Versace Dylan Blue, but none of them are just like this, and this isn't just like those. It would be similar to saying like Game of Thrones is just like The Hobbit. No, it's in that same fantasy realm, but it's a completely different story with different characters. This is a completely different fragrance than Bleu de Chanel or Versace Dylan Blue or any kind of blue fragrance. And I think for that reason that it stands on its own is supremely unique and masculine. It has that refined air about it, but it also can be worn casually, can be worn in any situation. Again, another Swiss Army knife of a fragrance. And that's why it's a 10 out of 10 for me. Our next 10 out of 10 flawless fragrance is from the house of Ralph Lauren. Now, admittedly, Polo Cologne Intense has some nostalgic factor. I wore this when I was in high school. That kind of green, citrus, pine, resinous DNA is built right into the center of this, and I love that fact, but it's just been modernized. This is a wonderfully deviant version of the original DNA. Primarily, you get a trifecta of basil, spearmint, and clary sage that is just so fresh, and yet it's interspersed with some other notes, and it's so well blended that it's the most masculine, spicy basil you'll ever experience. You've got violet leaf absolute, you've got thyme also as a spice in here, you've got vetiver, and a good bit of ambroxan. Although this isn't one of those heavier ambroxan fragrances, it's not quite as loud as some other ambroxan-based fragrances. This is more similar to a Prada Rasa. So it's very soft on the side of ambroxan, but that's what gives it its longevity. That's what kind of gives it its volume, and also adds to that fully modern feel, and is why it's a 10 out of 10 for me. Polo Cologne Intense. All right, guys, for our next and ninth 10 out of 10 fragrance is from the house of Versace. I love Versace Flame. I know it's been said to be a winter fragrance, but I wear it anytime. I think it's a great spring and summer fragrance too. I'll wear it just as much in spring and summer as I will in winter. Now, you're gonna wanna wear it in the cooler days of spring and summer, maybe the evenings of summertime. You definitely don't wanna wear it in a high heat situation because it's not a high heat fragrance. It won't do really well. It'll still live, it'll still make it through, but it just won't do quite as good or be quite as ebullient as it typically is in cooler weather. Guys, it's dealer's choice with Eros. Eros Flame is my pick, but if you prefer Eros, the eau de parfum, over Eros Flame, I would not fault you for that because it's a fantastic choice too. In fact, I did think briefly over, choosing the EDP Eros over the Eros Flame, but I ended up going back to this one because I use it quite a bit more and I feel like it's just more versatile and it's not quite as dog-eared of a fragrance as Eros is. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with using a familiar fragrance that many guys wear, but after a while you want something a little bit different. This is a little bit different, yet it still has that Eros DNA. Not gonna go into the notes, you got a good bit of cinnamon, lavender, there's something called pepperwood in here, some aroma chemicals in here that make it really, it's a good combination of synthetics with fresh fragrance notes that brings this to the modern arena as one of the best, most iconic fragrances, and that's why Versace Eros Flame is a 10 out of 10 for me. All right, guys, our 10th and final 10 out of 10 flawless or perfect fragrance comes from the house of Jean-Paul Gaultier. I honestly couldn't help myself with this one. I am a fan of Ultramall. The Le Male line of fragrances, every single one of them that I've tried, I'm like, cool, it's just a little bit different here or a little bit different there. But I think they really truly got it right with Ultramall. Besides Le Male Parfum, I think Ultramall is the heaviest of the Le Male line. It's also the sweetest of the Le Male line. It's also the darkest. So it's darker, sweeter, heavier. It's just like more everything. And that's why, thus, vis-a-vis Ultra, that wonderful mix of bergamot, pear, lavender, and mint in the open is what sets this apart from other of the Le Male line. I really love that minty pear and then that fresh lavender. The lavender, of course, is at the epicenter of this fragrance. If you're not a lover of lavender, then you won't like this. But if you like really fresh, sweet lavender that's similar, that almost goes into the arena of bubblegum, then you're gonna really like this. Another fragrance that's got 101 uses, but definitely not gonna wear it in high heat because of how sweet that it is. It's one you've gotta be a little careful about spraying on too much around those that are a little bit more sensitive to, sweeter fragrances. And that's why it is a 10 out of 10 for me. That wraps up my 10 out of 10 fragrances. I feel like, personally, these are probably the best representation of what these houses have to offer in terms of summertime fare, summertime fragrances. So I know these are relatively common fragrances and you guys probably have them or own them. If you do, let me know what your thoughts are on these, and if you would rate them less than a 10, let me know what that would be. And let me know if there are other fragrances out there that you feel belong in a 10 out of 10 list or a perfect fragrance or flawless fragrance list. Guys, thanks so much for stopping by and checking out today's video. And as always, thank you so much for your support on my channel. I'm Tommy with Studio Sense, and I'll see you tomorrow.